Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I am one of your hosts, Peter.
And I'm your other host, Eden.
Eden, how have you been?
You know, the weather's started to get kind of nice.
Okay.
It's that time of year where I start contemplating, do I need to mow this weekend or can I put it off for another few days? And I'm fast approaching. I can't put it off anymore. Yeah. But it's also supposed to be like 85 degrees on Sunday, so I hope that I can put it off at least past then. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I was contemplating that very same thought at some point last week. I remember saying to Gareth, I might need to mow the lawn this weekend. And then Saturday morning, there was like a half an inch of snow on the grass. So I didn't mow the lawn last Saturday.
Well, that sounds lovely. I would love for that to happen for me.
I didn't actually mind. I was not too bothered by it. But this weekend, I don't think that that's what will happen. In fact, it's supposed to be not quite as warm, but it's supposed to be about 70, 72 on Saturday. So I'll probably have to get out there and do the first pass and then go from there. But,
Fair. Here's the real question. Yeah. How much yard do y'all have?
Not very much.
When you say, how much do I have to mow, is this like, I have 3 hours of work ahead of me? Or is it like I have 45 minutes ahead of work?
No, I have like an hour and a half because I'm particular. So by the time I mow and then trim and then edge and then blow all the grass clippings and everything, it's about an hour and a half. But no, it's not a very big lot. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it's only like a third of an acre or so. So we don't.
You are our father's son.
Well, yes, I am. And I will say this, I have ceded a lot of control of the fenced in portion of the backyard to my teenage boys. So Gareth will do that part. I'll still go through and trim. But the part that is visible to others, I am a little more particular about. Not nearly as bad as Dad, but definitely more than my 14-year-old son.
I'm probably more like your 14-year-old son, but I also have a half an acre that's all grass and a push mower. So
you've got a lot more.
So it takes me 3.5 hours if I need to mow all of it, and I don't edge, I don't blow. That's just mowing. It's probably 3.5 hours.
Yeah, it's definitely not that bad here. And I did at the beginning of last summer, I got a new lawnmower that actually sped it up a lot. Now, because don't anybody ask me why. I couldn't tell you. I have an Ego Power electric mower that is really very powerful, and it'll just chop through the grass, and it's really quite nice self-propelled. I refuse to use the self-propelled part of it, so I just push it. I don't know why.
I mean, is it a wireless one or is it a corded one?
Oh, no. It's battery powered. So I don't have to plug it in. It's really
Cassie
nice.
Cassie has been electric mower curious for years, but when we bought our mower like a decade ago at this point, we bought a Honda, and you remember Nana's old Honda.
The Honda's never going to stop running, so you can't.
It's never going to stop running, so I probably will never end up replacing it.
Nope. You're never going to be able to use the when the mower dies as a reason to buy a new mower. So you're just going to have to be like, oh, well, it's time and we're going to do it. We had a previous electric mower that was a Cobalt, and it was pretty weak. And so I got just tired of I had it for a bunch of years, but I got tired of it. And then I kind of ended up going all in on the Ego Power system, which is nice because so I have a mower, I have a blower, I have a trimmer, I have an edger, I have a hedge trimmer, and this last winter I actually bought a snowblower. And they all come with batteries. And so now I just have this array of batteries that I can have. Basically, I've always got plenty of batteries charged up that I can get everything done and go through it. So that was kind of nice, is getting something where all of the batteries are compatible, even if they're different capacities. They'll still work for every other device. And so I just I went all in on that, and I've been pretty happy with it. And it's worked well, and it is nice that it's sunny enough that I have to start thinking about mowing, but at the same time, not super excited about the heat, though again, because of how dry it is here, it's never going to be as bad for me as it is for you.
Yeah, it's going to be nasty, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Sure.
We'll see how it goes. That's the humidity, man. It gets you every time.
No, it does.
People, when you live in the desert and you hear people say it's not the heat, it's the humidity, you're like, I think that you're lying, because it is 98 degrees and it is very, very hot. And then you go to a place where it is like 97% humidity and you go, oh my God, they were right. It's not the heat. It is the humidity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because 85 on on a 100% humidity day, 85 degrees feels way worse than like 110 in a desert.
Oh, totally. Because at least in the desert, if you get into some shade, there's some relief. And, again, having lived 4 years in North Carolina and 6 years in New England, while New England doesn't get quite as hot, New England will get warm enough that there's like 2 to 3 weeks in the middle of summer that are just miserable because it is so humid, and it is, high 80s to low 90s. So yeah, no, the humidity's way worse, and it just gets hot here, and it's not that bad. And, every place here has central air conditioning and everything. So it's, I can't complain. I still do, but I shouldn't. So yeah.
That's fair.
Well, what have you been checking out lately? Anything interesting that you wanted to share on the pod before we move on to our topic for the day?
I do. I have a few things worth mentioning. First off, I did go see Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire.
Okay. And thoughts that you want to share with us?
You bet. It shouldn't be called Godzilla X Kong because Godzilla is in this movie for like 5 minutes.
Oh.
My boy was done pretty dirty by this one. It's a Kong movie, and Godzilla is like eighth fiddle.
That's too bad.
And so, as a certified Godzilla lover, I was annoyed at how little my boy is in there when he gets top billing in the name, and then he's not in the movie for more than like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But I just thought it wasn't very good. The problem was it had about 4 movies worth of plot in one, and none of those 4 movies worth of plot seemed that interesting. And then the other big problem is they made Kong the protagonist.
Gotcha.
And you can't make the monster the protagonist. We've talked about that as we've talked about some of these movies. The monster can't be the protagonist. The monster needs to be a force of nature that affects the protagonist's lives. But Kong is this is just a Planet of the Apes movie, except the ape is 300 feet tall, basically.
Gotcha.
And I thought that was disappointing. The human half of it was pretty bad too, and like I say, my boy just was not in the film. So, I think it's not as bad as some other Godzilla movies I could name. None of the ones we've watched. It's better than, or it's worse than all of the ones we've watched. And it's probably the weakest of this legendary MonsterVerse series. But I'm glad I saw it, but it was kind of disappointing.
Yeah. I listened to the Kind of Funny review podcast episode about it. And yeah, they seem pretty cool on it. Overall, I think it averaged out to sort of an okay rank in their list of the Godzilla/Kong movies. But there were multiple of the folks on the podcast who really, really did not like it.
I would put it solidly at the bottom of that list, I think, of this new crop. I think it was even worse than Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is saying something because I thought that movie was pretty bad. But Godzilla was in that one at least.
So it had that was one of its saving graces.
For it. Also, like, the monster fights in that one are pretty sick. The problem with Godzilla King of the Monsters is the human part is the dumbest dog crap possible. But and like about the least interesting and not like just not compelling characters. The monster fights in that one are pretty sick. Got Boston in that one, and Boston deserved it.
Yeah. Cool.
And let's see, what else have I been doing? So this is a thing. I have to repent from a thing that I said in the last episode, because I said something about like, why don't I just go watch Miami Vice? I like that show. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, after thinking about that podcast, I was like, have I ever actually watched Miami Vice, or is it just the cultural osmosis of what Miami Vice is?
I wondered that
growing up in the 80s.
And
I have rectified that. I'm about halfway through season 1 of Miami Vice, and let me tell you something. Do you know what's a good fucking TV show? Miami Vice. Here's the thing. If you are ever Miami Vice curious, you just need to watch the pilot. It's a 2-parter. It's like 96 minutes or whatever between the two of them put together. And it's like the perfect pilot. It's the best pilot for a TV show I think I've ever seen in terms of setting the stakes, making everything super clear, compelling performances, incredible cinematography and editing, and just like it is a perfect encapsulation movie that's like 90 minutes long, and you never need to watch any more after that. Although the show is still pretty good after that, but like it's genuinely maybe the best pilot I've ever seen. It's so good. It's so good. There's this scene near the end, and I watched, I was Googling around about it and trying to find out more about how Miami Vice came to be. And there's this interview I saw with the director of the pilot. And there's this really, really effective scene near the end of it where like the two cops have decided they're gonna take down this drug lord, and like they're gonna do whatever it takes. And they're like driving through the dark Miami night, and Coming in the Air Tonight is playing.
Yes.
And
so I'm just going to briefly say, I don't remember why, but I recently saw this scene on the internet. Somebody linked to it for some reason, and it was good.
The vibes are, the whole show has those vibes though. It's 96 minutes of that vibe.
Okay.
And like, it's so cool. And like, but this interview, like, so they're driving around, it's mostly just silence and these shots of this like really cool Ferrari Testarossa with the what do you call it? Convertible part, the hood down, and like, not hood, the roof down. And like, they're just like Crockett and Tubbs are driving through the night. Tubbs is like loading his sawed-off shotgun with shells. They like pull over, and Crockett calls his ex-wife, and he's like, "Was any of it ever real?" And she's like, "Yeah, it was." And then he just like hangs up and walks away, and you're just like, "God damn!" And so I was watching this video that was the director talking about that, and he was like, "That whole scene was invented in the edit because whenever like we were still setting up stuff, or like we were out at night, we had hooked up the car, like hooked up the camera to the car at all these cool angles. So I was like, just go get some B-roll. Just go drive around. We're going to be setting this up for another 20 minutes. Just go drive the car and take some footage." And so they had all of this leftover, extremely like evocative footage where like the camera is bolted to the side of the car, and like 2/3 of the shot is just the car and the lights reflecting off the car as it's driving down the highway.
Yeah.
And he was like, I just built it in the edit because I had all this space, and we had an extra like minute and a half in the episode. And I talked to the guys and I said, "Can you get this song?" Because it was really popular on the radio right then. And they're like, "Yeah, we can get that song." So we just built it. And it's like one of the most incredible scenes I've ever seen in a TV show ever. It's so cool.
It is really, really good.
But like I said, I'm about halfway through that first season, and like it has not lived up to the highs of that pilot, but it's really solid. I am shocked at how cynical and like just like kind of not mean, but sort of mean the show is, because like fundamentally, the show is not saying that these are like good cops out doing good things. It's saying these are compromised people using an extremely compromised thing that is civil asset forfeiture to pretend to be these drug dealers. And like, what cost does that have to them personally, mentally, spiritually? What cost does it have to their friends and family who are endangered, or many of the other cops who are killed, and all of this sort of stuff? And it's extremely cynical about it. And it's like, I'm shocked at how good this series is so far. I'm very curious. It's like my lunchtime show I watch.
Sure.
So I'm curious to see how it develops, and whether it, like, you know, most shows get bigger as time goes on, and I don't know if getting bigger is going to, how getting bigger will affect the show, if that is the trajectory it goes on, because not every show does, but most shows get bigger, the characterizations get louder or more strident, and I don't know how that'll work for this show, but as of now, it's really impressive.
Cool.
Let's see some other stuff I've been checking out. I read, over the course of about a day and a half, I read all 6 volumes of a manga called My the Psychic Girl.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of My the Psychic Girl?
No, definitely not.
Well, there's a reason for that, and that's because it's been out of print for 25 years or something. But what's interesting about it is it was one of the very first manga series they ever brought over and translated for America.
Okay.
And they started it in like 1987. And it was published bi-weekly by Eclipse Comics, and was like, it was 28 issues, I think, when it was all said and done, of the comic, which worked, and it was published in about 6 volumes. But it hasn't really been published since. And I had always been curious. I was like, how did they pick this comic as like one of the very first, if not the first one, published in single issues like that? Because like, there'd been other manga that had been brought over, but they'd been published in like books instead of like in single issues, and this was like the first one that they ever published. And I was able to find like a really good deal on it, because again, it's out of print, but I was able to find a really good deal on the 28 issues of the Eclipse Comics, and it was incredible. I read the whole thing in a day and a half, and I was just like enraptured by it. And part of that is how it looks. I'm going to send you in the chat a link to a page so you can see what this ding dang comic looks like, and you too can be like, oh, so this is like dope.
Okay, I'm excited.
And it's just like one of the most striking looking comics I've ever seen.
Okay, yeah, that is a very, striking is a great word for it.
It's really cool. The artist was Ryuichi Ikegami, who is like a classic, been around for decades, but a lot of his stuff hasn't come over. He's actually the guy who did the Spider-Man manga back in the 1970s, which is super cool and has never actually been brought over in its entirety to the States, which is a real bummer, because I think it's a really cool series and I wish it was all in English. But it's a pretty... My the Psychic Girl was a really good time. It was propulsive and exciting, and like the stakes just kept getting wilder and wilder. I had an extremely good time with it though, and it was one of those things where it was like, I don't know why this isn't still in print. It should still be in print, because I get it now, having read it, why you chose this as one of the very first manga to bring over to America, because it slaps. It's really, really good.
Cool.
And I guess that's all I'll mention right now. There's some other stuff, but I don't need to talk anymore. I've been talking a while.
That's all good. It's good to hear what you've been into. So, a couple things I thought I would mention before we jump into our topic.
Please.
I think the only thing worth mentioning is I did finish Forspoken that we had talked about. And it was fun. It was good. I think I ended liking it more than I did at the time we talked about it previously. And without going into too many spoilers, because honestly, I think that it is a game that is worth playing. And so I don't want to, I don't want to spoil it. But there are a few twists that made me at least enjoy the experience of playing the game and enjoy the story a little bit more. I still think that Frey was a kind of obnoxious character. Again, I could kind of see where she was coming from and why she was acting the way she was. So it didn't feel like it was out of place in any way. But in the end, I enjoyed it and I had some fun with it. It was definitely one of those things that after we talked, I pretty much then just started mainlining things. I didn't worry about doing a ton of the side stuff. And I was finishing it up and I thought to myself, should I keep this installed in case I do want to come back? In the end, I don't believe I kept it installed because I thought to myself, honestly, it was fun, but you've got so many other, I have so many other games to play that I didn't see myself coming back to it. And
for sure.
So, I uninstalled it. And then I had a few days where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to play. And I thought to myself, you like robots. You should try Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon.
You did the dang thing.
I started Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon, and I was having a good time with the first little mission. And then I got to this big helicopter, whatever thing that you got to blow up at the end. And I died 3 times and I said, fuck you, game. And I turned it off.
I mean, it's a From game. It's a From Software game.
I know it is. And, I didn't uninstall it, but I was like, nope, now is not the time for that. And so then I fired up a game that I am pretty sure I bought because you mentioned it. And that was Atlas Fallen.
I mentioned that I wanted to play it. I haven't played it, though.
Yeah, I remember you talking about it at some point. And then I had gone and it was probably on some quasi sale on Steam at some point, and I bought it because I'm a sucker.
Sure.
And I will tell you this, very interesting going from Forspoken to Atlas Fallen.
Sure.
Because in Forspoken, you have this bracelet thing wrapped around your wrist that gives you, at least for much of the game, your powers and abilities and talks to you. And in Atlas Fallen, you find a gauntlet that gives you powers and is inhabited by a spirit and talks to you.
Oh my.
And in Forspoken, you've got the parkour mechanic where you can move fast. And in Atlas Fallen, you have a sand surfing mechanic that whenever you're on sand, which there's quite a lot of it in this world, you slide and move really fast on the sand.
Okay.
And the wraiths, the enemies that you fight in Atlas Fallen, are certainly not exactly the same, but they are reminiscent of the animals that you fight in Forspoken because of the break, where they're animals that have kind of been twisted. And their wraiths, they all look like animals, but again, they're kind of warped and twisted in a way. So it's really been weird. It's really been weird going from the one to the other.
Didn't they come out within a couple of months of each other?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why it's so weird. Because
Atlas Fallen came out in what, August of last year?
They're
July
both 2023 games, which with the size of these games and the budgets that I'm sure they had and everything, there is absolutely no way these were either way stealing from each other. They just were developed independently and have a bizarre number of similarities.
Well, and Forspoken was developed by Luminous, which was a Square Enix studio in Japan. Deck 13's a German company. This is the guys who made The Surge, which is a pretty cool Souls-like if you wanted to be weird dystopian sci-fi Souls-likes.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's so weird.
It was really weird because I'm again, if I didn't know that they both came out the same calendar year within just a few months of each other, you would look at this and you would go, they totally stole from each other. The one other thing I will say about Atlas Fallen, and again, I'm enjoying it. I've probably put, I don't know, I don't want to fire up Steam and see how long it says. But I've probably put at least 4 or 5 hours into it. And it's fun. It's fine. Again, in kind of a similar fashion as Forspoken, I do not see myself finishing it and going, oh my gosh, that was great. But I get a feeling that it's probably going to be a good, 20-ish hours, and then I'll have fun and then I'll be done. Because the two other games that I was debating, and I was like, no, I can't do this. It was either Cyberpunk 2077 or Baldur's Gate 3. And I just mentally and emotionally wasn't ready for, putting 100+ hours into a game right now. So,
that's super fair. To be fair, you probably get out quicker than that in Cyberpunk, but it's worth it to spend that much time in Cyberpunk because it's a cool world. But
yeah,
I do know Baldur's Gate 3 is just like that long. That's just
big.
You want to play the whole game, it's going to be 160 hours.
Yeah. Which, I can do. I think we've talked about this before. I think I remember seeing that I had put like 160 hours into Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But just wasn't feeling like I was ready to make that kind of commitment. So Atlas Fallen has been fun. Other than that,
that's super fair.
I don't really think there's anything else. So I think we can dive into our topic of the week.
Before we dive in, I should mention really quickly, I have continued playing Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, aka we have Baldur's Gate 3 at home. However, that consisted of me realizing that I had made a mistake in the very first conversation with the person I wanted to pursue a romance with 25 hours previous to where I was at. So I started the game over.
No. Oh, I'm sorry.
But I didn't screw it up this time.
Okay.
So
it was worth it.
The romance is still on, and I'm almost through. Last time I was like, I think I'm getting to the end of Act 3. I am almost through with Act 3. I got like 3 more quests I'm going to do before I kick off Act 4.
Okay. All right.
So we'll see. I was very disappointed, but also I didn't really like the class I had chosen, so it was kind of okay. I picked a new class that gave me a wolf that I get to ride around and do combat on, so that's fun.
Okay. I definitely want to at some point get back into those kind of isometric CRPGs. But
they're real finicky, especially like I respect what Owlcat is doing here, but they are building a very finicky game on one of the finickiest rule sets. And because Pathfinder is just finicky. Pathfinder is, for those who don't know, Pathfinder is just basically D&D edition 3.5, but with a different cosmology and even more complicated. And boy, does it show. It's
interesting.
It's way more complicated than like Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be as a D&D 5th edition game. It's way more complicated than like the Pillars of Eternity games are, which I know they developed their own system for, but is still like a D20 style system.
Sure.
It's really finicky. So I did eventually start playing with cheat codes, because especially when I started over a second time, I was like, so I'm going to turn on the cheat codes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Biggest thing I did was I turned on the multipliers for, army recruitment because of that whole crusade section, and I times it by 100. So actually I think I times it by 1,000 accidentally. So every time I'm like, I would like to recruit 13 Hell Knights. Oh, I think you meant 1,300 Hell Knights.
Excellent.
And then nothing can stop my armies because there's 1,300 Hell Knights in my army, so it's fine.
Very good. Very good. All right. Anything else?
Nah, let's get to this here novella.
Okay. So this week we are going to be talking about the Hugo Award nominated novella Ogres by British author Adrian Tchaikovsky. This was released just last year in 2023. And just a little bit of history as to sort of why I threw this out there to Eden. Number one, we've done some movies between the Godzilla movies and Dune, and I don't know. For me, I kind of felt like I wanted to, just go for a change of pace. At the same time, just trying to be practical, I knew we needed to read something if we were going to, because I came up with this idea less than 2 weeks ago. It needed to be something that we could get done fairly easily. And this is just around 100 pages, so very easy to do in that short amount of time. I have been curious to read some of the books by Adrian Tchaikovsky. The Incomparable, one of the other podcasts that I listen to, a number of the frequent guests are both, they are voters, and they nominate works for both the Hugo and the Nebula awards. So they're on those. And so every year they'll have a number of episodes where they go through and they read everything that was nominated for either the Hugos or the Nebulas. And then they'll have a podcast episode where they talk about a few of those things. And he's been nominated many times, and he's won a few times. I guess his previous one of his, Elder Race, was nominated for the novella for the Hugo in 2022. His series, The Children of Time, actually won the Hugo in 23 for the best series, which interestingly, I think if I remember correctly, he thought that best series was a stupid award, so he actually declined the Hugo for that he had won.
Okay.
But and so he's one of those authors that a couple of times in the past few years, I've heard people talk about his stuff, and he does kind of fantasy and some science fiction, so a little bit of both. And I remember hearing people talk about Ogres, did not remember the conversation about this at all, but I thought to myself, hey, here's a 100-page, novella from an author that I at least have been interested to read some of his stuff. And I thought it was a good excuse for me to read something and for us to have a change of pace as, from the movies that we've been doing, which the movies are great and I'm enjoying the movies, but, again, just thought it'd be fun to change things up a little bit. So what were your kind of overall thoughts about this novella, Eden?
There were parts where I was enjoying it quite a bit. There were parts where I really hated it.
Okay.
The gimmick did not work for me, which I'm sure we'll talk about the gimmick.
Okay.
It didn't work for me. And I'll talk about why. But all in all, I thought to myself, 4.6 on Goodreads, guys? 4.6? That seems a titch high to me. And I know Goodreads trends high. Basically any book I look up on Goodreads, I'm like, that score's about a point higher than it should be. But in this case, it was more like, this score's about 1.5 points or 2 points higher than I feel like it should be.
Okay.
What did you think about it, though?
I think I enjoyed it a lot more than you did.
It sounds like.
It definitely was not, it was definitely not a 5 on Goodreads. I think on Story, why can I not think of the website now? Storygraph, which, in my effort to, stick my thumb up at Amazon and its rapacious behavior in the works of books and audiobooks and all that stuff. So, I've been trying to, again, kind of move away from Goodreads to Storygraph. But I think because I was reading it in the Kindle app and it automatically pops up Goodreads at the end, I think in Goodreads I gave it a 4-star. I think in Storygraph, where it will allow you to do up to quarter stars, I think I gave it a 3.5. But yeah, I liked it, and I realized something, and it could be, and this will be interesting because, I think I'm actually a sucker for post-apocalyptic fiction that doesn't initially seem post-apocalyptic.
So you're the Village truther. I guess that's not really post-apocalyptic, but it does do that genre shift about 2/3 of the way through.
Okay. I guess I didn't you're talking about the M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village?
I am talking about the M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village.
Okay. would not have gone there
where like
because
2/3
I barely remember that movie, but yes.
Spoiler alert for The Village, but 2/3 of the way through you find out it's not very good. But 2/3 of the way through you find out that they're like weirdos who live on like a nature preserve to try to pretend like they're like pilgrims. But the kids' generation doesn't know that. Only the adults' generation knows that.
See, I don't think I would have gone there because for me it was more, and again, this gets back to, and I think we've talked about this, the Sword of Shannara was the first big fantasy book I read when I was 8-9 years old.
Sure.
And as you read more of those books, it really becomes apparent that this is that there are hints of, technology, this, that, and the other. And then all of Terry Brooks' books all eventually tie into each other. And you realize that, yes, all this was like future, but post-apocalyptic. So it's kind of a fantasy type setting. And I don't know, but I wonder if the fact that the Shannara books were kind of as fundamental in my being introduced to the fantasy genre, I wonder if that is something that has made me gravitate towards that. Because while I kind of had a gut feeling that was what was going on in this book from the very beginning.
Yeah, I did too.
I actually really liked that part of it. I thought that was cool because I like it.
I didn't dislike that. That's not the trope I'm talking about. I'm talking about the write the damn book in second person trope.
That one. Yeah, that was different. And because I have read very little in second person, I kind of liked it.
Well, here's the thing. There ain't that much written in second person. There are two major things I could think of that are written in second person. Every choose your own adventure book and about 10 pages of drug-filled delirium in the middle of La Muerte de Artemio Cruz by Carlos Fuentes. And here's the thing. 10 pages of drug-filled delirium in the middle of La Muerte de Artemio Cruz. Mwah. I love it. This is beautiful. 118 pages, almost 118 pages of second-person narration for no reason. I did not truck with very well. So I think I was predisposed to be a little annoyed by it, I think, by the start. And maybe that's influenced how I felt about it as a whole. But I was like, as I was reading, I was just like, I don't think you're justifying, and I don't think it justifies that break from convention in that way,
Okay. Interesting, because I think it did. I think at the end, when you realize who's been telling this story, I think it worked for me.
We'll talk about that once we're in the spoiler zone.
Yes.
But,
so I was going to say,
we'll talk about why I think it didn't work for me as well.
Big picture overview. Ogres takes place again in this kind of the initial setting that's being painted for you feels kind of like this agrarian, village setting. You've got the main character, Torquil, who is the son of kind of the guy who's the leader, kind of the major domo of this little community. And Torquil will become the next steward of this area. But you get the impression, he's just kind of he's a rascally scamp. He gets into trouble, but he's charismatic and he doesn't ever get into real bad trouble. So everybody still kind of likes him. And, he goes off into the woods and he hangs out with a band of outlaws that are hanging out there. And their whole lives are dictated by what they call the ogres. And the ogres are bigger than them. The ogres are stronger than them. And there's a religious system in place to teach everyone that the ogres or the masters, that they are the chosen and that everybody else kind of exists to serve the masters. And that's really the purpose of all these little communities is they work, they harvest, they farm, they raise animals and everything so that the ogre who owns that land can basically collect their taxes or their tithe of this and impose their will and live high on the hog. And the Sir Peter, who is the ogre over this area, he shows up on one of his regular trips, and he shows up in his big fancy car, and he's got a bunch of they refer to them as, sometimes they're called economics, sometimes they're called monkeys, but the people, they he's got a whole retinue of them, and then he's got his son who will take over for him. So sort of kind of mirror images of Torquil and his father. And this is kind of set up, so I think I can say this before we go into spoilers. Basically, the Sir Peter's son is a jerk, and he's a bully, and he comes into the kitchen where Torquil is and kind of starts pushing Torquil around. And now it's important to understand Torquil is bigger than most people. He's not as big as the ogres, but he's
a beefy boy,
and he's stronger than most of the monkeys, most of the economics. And so as Sir Peter's son pushes him, he punches him. And then he takes off, and he runs, and he goes and he tells his dad, and his dad just says, get out of here. Go into the forest, go hang out with the outlaws, get out of here. When you come back, I'll have everything smoothed over, but get out of here. So Torquil runs off into the forest, hangs out there for a little bit. The outlaws are maybe not as excited to see him and hear that he did this as he thinks that they're going to be, because maybe they're realizing that this is something that could have some serious consequences. Anyway, eventually, after spending kind of part of a night and then being a little disaffected at his reception by the outlaws, he goes back into town and kind of spies in and is looking in and sees, and there's Sir Peter and there's his son, and they're all sitting there feasting and laughing it up and eating. And one of the big differences is that the people the economics, they don't really eat meat. It doesn't agree with them. They can't digest it. It makes them sick. And so there's Sir Peter, and he's going at it, and he's got meat. And then the other humans who are there at the party from this town, they just don't look super excited. And so Torquil walks into the kitchen, and he sees the carcass of a deer that they had shot and caught on the way that's been prepared. And the head of the deer is in this ice box to take back to Sir Peter's and be mounted on the wall. And then he sees some other bones, and he's not quite sure what they are at first because he doesn't recognize what animal they came from. And then he looks in the second ice chest, and it never explicitly says it, but he looks in that second ice chest, and it's his father's head. And he realizes that the meat that they are all eating is his father. And he understands that this is a consequence of him having hit Sir Peter's son. Sir Peter's son comes back into the kitchen and sees Torquil there, and he suspects that he saw him through the window. And he gets up in his face, and he's leaning on the table, and instantly Torquil realizes that he's got the advantage, and he grabs this butcher's knife and slices Sir Peter's son's throat and kills him and takes off. And then kind of the rest of the story goes from there. So I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and say from here on out, boom, spoilers.
Spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone from here on out. I'm going to give a short kind of what happens in the rest of the book, and then let's talk about what worked, what didn't, and kind of what our thoughts were. So
sounds good.
Main character runs off into the forest, meets up with the outlaws again. They eventually go to this widow's place, and, he thinks things are going to be hunky-dory, and then all of a sudden up shows this ogre with these dogs, chases him down. He gets caught. He finds out that one of the other outlaws turned him into the ogres in hopes that, this would take the heat off the outlaw group. Of course, the guy who turned him in then gets killed by the ogre. And he gets taken, Torquil, the main character, he gets taken, and he gets taken to, I think it was basically a holding place, and Sir Peter shows up, and he gets beat and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden up shows Isadora. And Isadora is an ogress, and she apparently has enough clout that she doesn't let them do anything more to Torquil, and she takes him to her manor, and he becomes part of her retinue. And while there, he meets a number of other people, and you get the impression that Isadora is kind of a scientist. She's doing a lot of studying. The monkeys, or the economics, as she refers to them, the economics that are in her retinue are all very smart. They're all helping do scientific experiments and studies. And Torquil really doesn't know why he's there, but Isadora hints that there's a reason. And then he's with her for like 6 years. And in the course of this, he gains access to books, and he starts reading, and he reads about kind of the history of their world a little bit, and reads about, they call this the brink. The brink was a time when there was a big change. And after the brink, now the ogres are there. And he keeps reading, and he starts trying to ask questions. And the other main person in Isadora's retinue is this Minith. And Minith is kind of really harsh to him. You get, at least again, the impression. And she's pretty judgmental. She's cold. She doesn't seem like she's a fan of Torquil. And eventually, Torquil understands what happened in the world. And what happened was that people said, no, there's too many people. And they're using too much resources and too much space. And so they did a couple things. Number one, they started introducing genetic changes that would make it so that certain people, they were being born smaller. And they had, for example, lower testosterone levels and things like that made them, they were more docile. They were more manipulable. They couldn't actually, like he talks about a few times, most of the other economics, they can't actually get angry in the way that Torquil can. And kind of long and short of it, Torquil realizes that the ogres are really just the elite, normal people who made this decision to genetically manipulate the rest of the population, make them smaller, more docile, and make it so that they can't really digest some of the foods and things like that. Again, all in efforts to keep them so they're using fewer resources, they are taking up less space. And then because there are still too many people, even though they're easier to control, then they realize, well, there needs to be far fewer people. So then they start again introducing genetic things that, are causing infertility and basically making it so that the population just dwindles for the most part. Torquil understands this, realizes that he is a genetic aberration in that he is bigger and stronger. So he's not quite ogre size, but he's bigger than the rest of the economics.
He's been getting bigger and stronger, he realizes during his time at Lady Isadora's place.
Exactly. She's been giving him meat. She's been getting him stronger and everything, so that then he decides that he's not going to stand for this. And he sneaks out of her house. Minith actually helps him escape, opens the gate so that he can leave. And then he goes and he just starts, he starts killing ogres, and he starts pulling people to himself. And it gets, becomes this bigger and bigger thing until finally, again, Isadora meets with him and says, kind of puts it to him and says, you've done a lot. You can't do more at this point. The ogres still have access to weapons from before the brink. And if they figure out how to use those, you cannot win. And offers him and basically says, look, stop what you're doing. Stop being a revolutionary. Stop the fight. Go back, basically be Sir Peter, take over all his lands, and be the best version of Sir Peter that you can be. Be the kindest steward over this. Be the best. Treat your people the best. Take care of them. Show the other ogres that there's a different way to do this. And Torquil says, after thinking about it, he says, okay. Because in his mind, I think he comes to believe, if not understand, okay, if I keep pushing this, everyone who's following me will die. And at least this way, if I take her offer, if I stop, then these people who I have called to me, who I have liberated, they can live. And he and Isadora, he says, okay. And they decide to drink to it. And they both drink. And they both realize that they were poisoned. And they die. And it was Mineth who had poisoned them. Because Mineth, as soon as he said yes, she realized he wasn't going to be the revolutionary anymore, that he was going to stop pushing to overthrow the ogres. And so she killed him. And that's pretty much where it ends.
And that is where the gimmick is revealed, that the last 115 pages you've been reading was Mineth recounting Torkel's story to himself.
Yes.
And then the last page and a half is in first person, and she's like, and that's why I had to kill him, because he wasn't the revolutionary I wanted him to be. And I'm like, okay. I don't know how you would know all that interior thoughts okay.
So tell me why it didn't work. And I mean, is that part of it, that she knew too much?
It's the idea that she would be like she would take care of him once he lost his revolutionary spirit. Mwah, love it. But the way that it was suddenly like, oh, and now it's in first person, and here's why the whole thing was in second person. I was like, that's a goofy gimmick it's a goofy like ass pull to justify your goofy gimmick that I don't feel like worked very well for me.
Okay. I mean, I think that's
textually, yeah, kill the person who's turned their back on the revolution. Go for it, Mineth. Cool. Thumbs up, clapping for you. But I don't know. The gimmick didn't justify itself to me.
Okay.
I don't know. What did you think about the whole thing as a whole? You said you liked it quite a bit. Tell us why.
I did. I quite liked it. Again, I like that trope. I like the idea that this was our world, that the ogres were really just humans and that everybody else had gotten smaller and weaker. I thought
that was a funny conceit once I realized, it's not that they're 9 feet tall. It's that everyone else is like 3 feet tall.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And it paints a funny picture as you kind of think about that.
That's silly. That's kind of silly. When they're like, they have cars and they have trains and they're huge. They're ogre size. I'm like, that's a big fucking car. No, it's just a Cadillac. It's just normal Cadillac size.
Totally.
That just looks big when you're 2 feet tall.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like that part of it. I think because I have read so little in the second person, and, look, I did an online creative writing course throughout the course of last year. And I remember when we were talking about point of view, and they talked again, first person versus third versus omniscient third versus second, thinking to myself, boy, I just don't see how second person could really work. And again, when I started reading it, it was not working for me very well. The more I read it, I think about probably 20 pages in, it had kind of clicked for me. And I think I just enjoyed it because it isn't something that I have read very often at all. And so I enjoyed the way of it. And then I liked at the end, even though I agree there's some issues in that, how would Mineth have known all of these thoughts? Though I guess in my head, the way I interpreted it is she was projecting her own thoughts.
Sure.
And everything on him and using him as she didn't actually know what he was thinking. She had 6 years with him. So in terms of what he did and what happened to get him there, ample reason for her to discover all of that in the 6 years that they were living together in Isadora's manor. And so, again, I liked that it was a different way to tell a story than I am used to reading. So I enjoyed the change. And then I liked that there was an actual in-story reason for the way it was being told that way. And I think that for me was where it worked, that it wasn't just, it didn't feel to me like just a gimmick of which point of view we're telling it from, but that in the story, there actually ended up being a reason why it was being told that way. And I appreciated it.
Sure.
So,
sure.
It worked for me.
Yeah, that's super fair. How did you feel about I don't know, because here's the thing. It reads real quick, and I like you, after about 20 pages, I was like, it's fine. It's just a conceit. Just read the damn book. And sure. I stopped being bothered by it as much. I fundamentally find it hard. This is just me being a grumpy person who thinks too hard about things. I find it weird to read an allegory about slavery written by a white British man. I'm sorry, but like,
sure.
I don't know that you're the guy to be doing that. And like, I know people are like, people should be able to write whatever they want. Sure. But I can also say, I don't think you're the person to write that. And then I don't have to engage with it again. That was weird to me. I didn't like that part.
I get that. And I read it as much broader than slavery. I read it more as sort of not just slavery, but like classism and things like that.
Sure. But they use the word slave explicitly so many times.
That is true.
Also, just from an optics perspective, the fact that they're calling their enslaved class of people monkey, my guy.
Yeah, that one was a little.
There is a history of coded language there. There is a history of real world oppression tied to slaves being referred to by that specific moniker. And that too was a thing where I was like, you are a white British man. Shut the fuck up, dog.
Fair. I think I liked it. I think, yes, because that was definitely a problem. I appreciated once it got to Isadora, and it just sort of switched then, and for the most part starts using the word economics because
yes, sure.
Because then it avoided that. But yes, I think that was something that could have and should have been avoided from the beginning. I think there were better ways to, different descriptors, different ways to refer to them.
And like,
that's a very fair point.
Fundamentally, I think that stories about class struggle are interesting, and I'm very excited about them, especially when you see them from the perspective of the person who's the revolutionary. Sure. I'm into that sort of thing. But like, when it is tied into all of this talk about slavery and like racial epithet and things like that, it makes it more messy than it would have been if it had been more clearly delineated that this was like, I'm trying to do an allegory about class here, so I'm going to focus on class-type stuff rather than tie class and racism and all of these and bigotry in this particular way, all tied into this really messy ball. And like, I see where you're coming from as the writer. I see where you're like trying to be like, I'm trying to make this as like universally understandable as possible. And not everybody's going to be up on the whole like bourgeois versus the proletariat. So if I focus entirely on that sort of framing of things, then maybe that will turn my readers off. And if I turn to a thing that more people will know more about, which is the struggle against slavery, then maybe that will appeal to people more fully than it would if I focused solely on a class issue or a nationalist issue like a subaltern and like dominating colonialist class or things like that. Sure. I don't know, but it was just real messy for me to such a degree that it kind of turned me off from the book.
Oh, I think that's very fair. And those are very fair criticisms. So other thoughts that you had?
And not to beat a dead horse, but like, he's like, by the end of the book, he essentially has become an ogre. He's the same size as Lady Isadora. So he has become an ogre.
Yeah.
So then it's like, he's the good enlightened ogre trying to free the poor benighted lessers. And that too just made me like, this was written by a British white man. Like, it was just written by a white British dude, and it just shows in just about everything about it, both for good and for ill.
Mm-hmm. I think that is why I liked the way it ended as much as I did, because I was getting a little concerned as the book's going on. I'm like, how does this end in a good way? And not even a good way, but like, how does this end in a way that feels satisfying? Because there's no way he can't defeat the ogres, all of them. Like, he's going to lose.
Absolutely.
And so my question was, how does he lose in a satisfying way? And I liked the way it was for that very reason, where basically he gets to that point and Mineth is like, okay, if you have lost your drive to continue to do this, then you're dead and I'm going to kill you and get you out of the way.
And again, that part right there, that was where I was like, okay, I'm back in now, because now it is the person who had been pretending at being a revolutionary. Now it's the person who was like, oh, I am rejecting my class interests as an ogre to help the economics. But as soon as the chance to join that class was presented to him to really become a land holding ogre, as the book uses, he says yes. And so Mineth is like, no, you don't, dog. No, I don't think so. I do not think so. And so that was satisfying. I did like that part.
And honestly, it was, as I had been trying to think, as I was getting close to the end, how is this going to wrap up in any way that is remotely satisfying? I obviously hadn't thought of that particular ending, and it ended up being much better than anything I had come up with. So I enjoyed that. That was, I liked that twist at the end. So
yeah, I did like that twist at the end, and like it made me rethink how I had thought about Mineth through the rest of the book, which that's always kind of satisfying when you get to the end of a book and it makes you rethink one of the characters that you had created some sort of, mental image of, and it makes you say, I was off there.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up tonight?
I'm glad I read it. I've heard of this guy for a while, and I've thought, oh, maybe I should read something. I'm glad I've read something of his, because now I can say, yeah, I've read some Adrian Tchaikovsky. It doesn't work for me, but it's not bad. I'm not out here saying this was a bad book. Because here's the thing. I did say that it was rated, if it's rated 4.5, it's maybe 2 stars too high. I'm a harsh rater, folks. If there's one thing you need to know about me, it's that I'm a very harsh rater. The amount of books that I read that get a 5 ever, very small. The amount of books I read that get a 4, pretty small. Like I'm clearly like much stricter on my ratings, because I feel like most things I read are between a 2 and a 3. And that's including like stuff that most people are like, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. And I'm like, it's like a 3.
I mean, that's the beauty about ratings, is they can mean different things to each one of us.
Well, and see, some of us are stupid and get a PhD in reading things. So I've read too much, and so I'm poisoned by knowledge.
Yeah, and some of us are just simple people who did not get PhDs. So,
Some of us are real doctors, and some of us are doctors of comic books. So,
well, just because I can do like I did today, one of the ways I like to describe my job to people is, and today was a perfect example. I get to put my hands inside people's bodies, rearrange things, and then wake them up afterwards and slap them on the butt and tell them to go home.
There you go. What a way to go. What a life.
So, all right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up now. We'll be back in another couple weeks. I think it's back with more Godzilla. So
It is 2001's Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters, All Out Attack, available for rent at all of your major rental places, unlike Biolante.
I'm excited to be able to watch it, and to be able to watch it more easily. So
a good version of it that's not a terrible dub from 1991.
Right. Until then, though, please give us a rating, leave some stars, and share this podcast with other folks. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention it at the top of the podcast, but The Middle of Culture is now on YouTube. If I was together and had my crap all ready to go, I would tell you exactly how to find it on YouTube, but YouTube has now added podcasts. And so if you just search for The Middle of Culture, the entire thing is there as a playlist that you can subscribe to in YouTube. And then, the new episodes show up on YouTube about 6 to 8 hours after they show up on your RSS feed if you've subscribed the old-fashioned way. But hey, I knew YouTube was pushing into podcasts. Google has killed the Google Play Podcast app. So your only way to get podcasts now that's Google approved is through YouTube. So I figured we would join and jump on the bandwagon. And so we're there. And, we've definitely had some of these older episodes that have had some listens. So people are discovering it there on YouTube. So
well,
go ahead
fun.
and check it out, and we'll be back in another couple of weeks with some more Godzilla talk. Bye, everybody.
We'll talk to you soon.